Ladies and gentlemen, we are live again with the No Absolutes podcast with my friend Ranga here, who I've met through the True Life podcast with George Monty, and we've been doing some psychedelic roundtables the past, quite a few Sundays, and we've had some fun conversations, and I've learned a little bit about your life, and you've learned a little bit about mine, and I just wanted to bring you on the podcast and have a good conversation, one-on-one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's good. Yeah, I think we've just been doing the round table, so it's more of a group discussion, right? So
right.
this is nice to have that one-on-one thing. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of awkward to have a group discussion multiple times with somebody without actually having a one-on-one discussion with them. So,
Yeah,
so I think this should be fun. So, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
yeah,
I know the questions you hate.
not hate necessarily. It's
Mm,
just that when I think of the answer is fleeting. But to give an overview, I believe we cannot be defined to a particular thing. I think throughout the discussion, more of what people can conceive of me will come out.
sure.
But my journey has been more dictated by my past events of having a very. I'm really sorry.
Oh, wow, that's loud. That's okay. That's the sound of life.
It is quite done.
All right.
It's one of our fosters, the resident dogs, trying to see the mom dog,
Mm,
right? And we just learned this thing before I get into the podcast. This is one thing I learned, that the mom dogs, if they know that there is another life, like a playful life, they kind of stop caring for the babies,
hmm.
right? So we had to keep them separate.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
that's for some other time. But coming back to uh, what I am, is just I grew up in a very strict culture, a tradition, which is supposed to be driving us towards self-realization, because
Hmm.
most of Hinduism is kind of about that, and in fact, all religions kind of point towards that. Yet, because of years of just doing the rituals and forgetting the practice, it seemed much more, compulsive and
Sure.
being jailed up, right?
Hmm.
So my journey right now would be freeing myself from those limitations.
Excellent. Yeah, it's interesting how, we can see the common threads through all of the different religions, right? We see the commonalities, what, a lot of people are calling spirituality these days. Uh, but it's really interesting how the years of just all of the, whether it be translation or control or what have you, it just turns into this thing where all of a sudden, it is just going through the motions. The magic is gone from the ritual because it
Yeah,
doesn't mean anything anymore. And it hasn't
yeah,
meant anything for a while.
yeah. It just becomes a superstition.
Right. Yeah.
It's just a positive superstition. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, and there's morals to be taken from it. People learn, ethics and stuff like this, but at the same time it is kind of lost its essence. And I think we're kind of seeing people searching for that essence that was lost through all of those mechanisms and years of control and turnover and translation. What do you think about that?
Definitely. When I say superstition, right? I was again, along with all these rituals and traditions, there was a lot of beliefs which didn't fit the current logical mindset.
Hmm.
Right, collectively, our intellectual mindset has increased. Let's say whatever we can call as IQ. It doesn't need to be a good thing or a bad thing, but trying to understand from a perspective of logical interpretation.
Hmm.
And as a kid growing, there are things they teach you in school, and there are things that doesn't make sense in rituals. Like, few things: black cat crosses, you cannot go, you have to wait 10 seconds or 20 seconds, or
Hmm.
drink some water. And if your t-shirt is caught in the door handle, something bad is going to happen. The door is trying to stop you from going, right? Instead
Oh,
of seeing
wow.
the actual cause and effect, that you're just walking close to the door and it got hooked on the door handle, right? And these things, And you're terrified to the point you don't care if you're late to something,
Sorry, my
you
shirt was
get
caught.
stopped.
Yeah.
Yep. That's the reason, and that's not going to cut it. um, but coming back to that part of doing these things, right, at some point all these rituals add the essence, as you say, which is lost because the practice that went along with it, it's just, I think, this practice was towards consciousness, and the egoic presence, which is a autonomous way of living. It's going to keep surviving, right? Life happens based on fear of death and it keeps surviving. And then self-awareness is there. This is how I see how consciousness is exploring and, let's say, developing, when you put a
Mhm.
time frame. So in that sense, you're, instead of being completely reacting, which I think most beings do, it's not a bad thing in that reaction. What happens now, there is slowly awareness building up in humans, right? Now there is an understanding that we can, one of those is that we can store food, right? One of
Mhm.
those that came from not just reaction but also contemplation of what is happening.
Right.
So if I could store for tomorrow, then I do less work.
Mhm.
So these things are happening, and when you see that particular point, it doesn't seem harmless. It's a nice idea. I mean, it makes it easy, right? So there is a shift towards from complete reactive patterns to a contemplation to, okay, let's make it easier and simpler, kind of, or
Mhm.
towards consciousness, let's say. So the middle ground of transition, there is a battle between ignorance, which is not true. Ignorance is bliss, and pure consciousness can be bliss. The
Indeed.
transition between ignorant consciousness is the fight, right? And there is this egoic sense where if we get to a practice, oh, I can tinker this a little bit because it worked a little bit differently for me, so I'm going to tinker this, with such good intent, right?
Mhm.
And down the line, it's a completely different thing. It's 180-degree opposite to where it started. And the funny thing is that there is no one to blame,
Right.
right?
No, it's just it's an artifact of time moving forward, and
Yeah.
and things changing, and a lot of things being lost to the sands of time as well.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
we have our history, but we know that that's kind of a very incomplete kind of idea of what actually has transpired.
Yeah.
Um, you know, you're on an interesting path. You're on a path similar to my own path. How old are you now?
I'm 27.
You're 27. And when did you leave India?
uh 2016 for my master's. So I was, what, 21? Yeah.
Hmm. I left the United States about 24. And then I was down
Nice.
in Central and South America for 6 years.
Okay. And what was the reason behind that move at that point?
Well, it was there was a lot that goes into it. One of it was actually correlated with my first mushroom experience.
Nice.
Yeah, and it happened just a few months before that, where I had all of a sudden I could see the future, and so I decided, I needed to explore why I could see the future, and it led me down just a rabbit hole of a path. But at the same time, I was kind of in a transition in life where it was just like, I was a lost kid essentially. The things that I had been taught and told were supposed to be, these absolutes and authentic things and all of this stuff. I started to see through that veneer, and I had a lot of questions of why. And so one day I just, I quit everything, gave a lot of shit away, and sold a lot of stuff, spun the globe, put my finger on the globe, and I was in the ocean because, it's a lot of ocean. And then I went on over and it was Costa Rica. So 2 weeks later, I left on a plane down to Costa Rica.
That's awesome. These are the stories which you know movies are made on,
Oh,
right?
sure.
It's
Yeah.
not that it's a fictional thing, it's just reality. But when you don't know, there is nothing to lose and you can make the jump. When you see movies, it seems fictional. It's like, yeah, it seems nice, but I cannot do this, right? There are a
Hmm.
lot of limitations, at least in my life. Like, I don't know about this, but that's the perception before the change happens.
Right.
And that's frightening, quite frightening,
Right. There's a
because it
lot of
seems so.
attachments. There's a lot of attachments.
and
That's
and the funny thing, there is no awareness of attachments. see, it's that's the
Right.
thing,
You
right?
don't
You're
even
slowly
know it's
realizing.
attachments. Yeah. Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it,
So most attachments, sorry to cut you, but
no.
most attachments are perceived as love
Right.
or caring for.
Right. Yeah, you want, your friends, the connections of your family, your parents, all of that, and then all of and then it's also you've invested these things, and so you're working towards a larger picture, and so and this is all kind of they're positively motivated attachments, which to your point, you don't know their attachments until all of a sudden you end up on the other side and you go, wow, I was restrained to where I was. I was
Yeah.
tied down unbeknownst to me, even though I felt like I could move freely, I felt like I could just walk through this world and everything was going great and it was a positive thing, but I was actually tied down. And I think we've talked a bit about the hero's journey on the psychedelic roundtable, but I think that relates to it a lot. And I think there's that fundamental aspect of a human being, which is to explore. We have this exploration is kind of one of these foundational elements to us, and it kind of leads us to down all of these paths. And I think in modern times, by and large, we've shut a lot of that down. And so it's nice to meet other people who've kind of taken that exploration up.
It's quite nice because once George contacted me, I was like, it's interesting. I've been trying to do a podcast, and this is nice. And the conversations that we had seem like there are people, because one of the major changes, at least that happened in my life, is that after my psychedelic trips, the feeling of alienation, right?
Sure.
Because suddenly you do not have topics to talk about, because what you're talking is boring to them, and what they talk is uh, all these relatively you perceive it as like, I mean, why are we caught in cheap stuff? Now again, it comes from a judgmental point of view, but at that point there is a lot of judgment of what I'm going to do after this. Now I have
Sure.
seen something, a state of you can't define it, but let's say a state of joy in the psychedelics, which is not tied to things, but there is no understanding that the joy arises because I'm just detached and I'm present, right? And the journey starts, and there is a lot of doubt, and you know, you're ready to lose people, because it's just at the end of the day, I would rather, be curious about this. Like,
Hmm.
I would rather be selfish. The world kind of also makes you think selfish is a bad thing,
Right.
but I want to take an extremist view, and that we got to be as selfish as we can, in the sense that we have to find that self, and eventually the not finding it would lead to that. But all the things are paradoxical in that sense, right?
Well,
But
kind of.
before I jump, I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
When I lost people, slowly I coped up with situations, and also intellectually understood, and then experientially had this realization that it is okay to be however it is, right? There are always people. It's just that idea of these people I need to talk to, and these people I'm not going to talk to because I don't know, and so on. And then meeting these set of new people like you, Kevin, George, and it's nice. So be you, and the life is gonna serve you with the people that you need in your journey, right?
Absolutely.
um, you were saying something about I said something about paradoxical nature, you said something, so I want to ask what you were gonna say.
Uh, well, it seems paradoxical, but a lot of things seem paradoxical on the surface until you actually, gain the knowledge of how to look at these things in different perspectives. And then all of a sudden the paradox erases itself and you see that it's not a paradox at all. It's actually, something that's very congruent, right? Like just how,
Yes.
we grow up thinking we're all separated. But after we venture down these paths a little bit, one of the most consistent things that people say is there's a vast interconnectedness to everything, right? In that
Yeah.
is everybody's experience, because there is. I think I so let me step back a little bit. So I kind of started my path from much more of a scientific and technical background. And one of the things when I was I was 29 or 30. So I was pretty far, 5 years into my journey of traveling down in Central and South America. And I had been studying physics and the structure of things and having these psychedelic experiences and trying to piece these things together, right? Like just every day, my practices is I'm always reading different research papers. And for a long time, it was in physics and quantum mechanics and all of the, in mathematics and all of this stuff and people's theories and ideas about how this could possibly go. Meanwhile, trying to have more experiences and merge those experiences. And so I eventually came up with my theory of information. And we could go into that in a little bit, but then that kind of gave birth to the philosophy of for my book, which is No Absolutes. And so when you were talking about all of that, the paradoxical nature, it's paradoxical if you perceive everything as these hard lines and these, the lines in the sand, if you will.
Yes.
But eventually, if you get to the point where you can recognize that these are just lines in the sand, then you get to those fuzzy edges of reality, so to speak. All of a sudden, that paradox evaporates.
I definitely agree with that. I tend to say paradoxical because at this point of life, for me, I have seen the non-paradoxical nature in psychedelic experiences. In that state, though, I'm not in my senses, and I do not have the language capability or the even the drive or the desire to put it into words. So there is a complete understanding, but the moment the desire comes to speak it out, I am in a place of seeing the paradoxical nature.
Sure.
So there is a understanding that is not experiential, that it is not a paradox, right?
All right. So let me
But the
let me
moment yeah,
let me throw this one at you. So that was for the longest period of my exploration of this and research into this. That was my experience as well. You would get to these states, and then bringing those pieces of knowledge back, that articulation of what that is, was just out of reach, right? You just could never. It was always like this. You're just like, I just can't grab it for some reason. I just can't grab the thing. And so I know exactly what you're talking about. But all of a sudden, I tried a different way. And so instead of just having that like very meditative state, I went out and I just was active. I ran. And so it's just like, and it was much more animalistic. And in that, all of a sudden, as I was moving in complete lucidity, I was having that same mental experience, but able to integrate it in real time and articulate everything with clarity multiple times, repeated with multiple people now.
yeah. I've definitely heard. I've been curious since the first time you mentioned about your mushroom and your
The running.
running up the hills. So, yeah, if you could say what drove you to that point.
Well, it was actually, I was just I had written the book. I just finished the book actually. And I was down with my buddy down in New Mexico, and it was just the right time and right place. And I thought to myself, I said, you know what? I'm going to have a good old fashioned vision quest.
What's the
And,
good old-fashioned what?
well, a good old fashioned vision quest. And
Right, yeah.
so it was kind of one of those things where, it was me being a little silly, because I'm always a little silly. Obviously, I dub myself Mr. Wizard. Uh, but so at the same time, there was serious and intent to it, and a lot of thought and experience that went into it. Uh, and so it just so happened to be the right time, and I just went for it one day. I didn't tell anybody. I was just like, "Yep, today's the day," and I just decided to go for it. And then it turned into 3 days, and then it was a repeat of 3 days, and then it's been a repeat experience multiple times now.
And how much shrooms was involved in it?
Over the 3 days, the first time it was like 0.3 ounces, I think.
Okay. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
lot. Yeah.
And so it was really interesting. And the first day was just this magical thing, right? And I wake up in the morning on day two, and I never felt so sore because I was a jackass running through the desert, on probably at 9, 10 grams of shrooms. And, it was like, I got sunburned. I had water blisters, and I was just sore can be. And I'm like, how am I gonna do? It's like, I'm gonna do it again because it was that good. And then it was also now it was because it was different too, because I was in full control of my faculties. I was fully able to. It was almost like, in a lot of psychedelic experiences, people talk about ego death, but this was the integration with the true self and the ego, where I was able to put the reins on the ego and ride it, and it was just it was fascinating experience. So I'm like, I'm going to do it again. Let's see if I can. Right, physically, this is interesting now. Now I'm in the thick of it. I got water blisters and everything, and I had heard a few months before Paul Stamets was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and he had mentioned that he got super sunburned on like 12 grams of mushrooms on the beach one time, and he's never been sunburned since. And so I was like, I wonder, why not?
Yeah.
So I was like, that was about where I was. Second day, I went out and I did it again. And I was actually running faster. Like, I mean, I was doing full, 400-500 yard sprints, just running up and down hills. Ran, another, I think it was like 23 miles that day. It was just ridiculous. And I was fat and out of shape too, mind you. It wasn't like, I'd been running a little bit, but I was out of shape. And so this was just fascinating. The next day, my water blisters were all gone, and I started to tan up a little bit. I still haven't been sunburned since then.
That's awesome. If we want to revisit that part of putting the mind on the ego, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I guess it's a good way to see it that way, because I see ego as nothing but, you have a conscious perception of the world, and there is a subconscious thing that is happening, right? uh, Most things are going to be self-regulated, like digestion, food, and so on. Yet more of the interactions with the world, it's still happening through the subconscious reactive pattern, right? And sometimes I see that as the ego, right? So when I feel like you're integrating this or putting the brain on it, I think the consciousness is seeping into the subconscious, and now it's not, there is no, I see integration when you're running as just there is no defense mechanisms running. The subconscious is welcoming the conscious. Yeah, you want to be conscious? Yes, become conscious, right? And
Right.
that, yeah,
Yeah, and it's like rocket fuel, and it's really interesting. And so,
yes,
from a bioelectric perspective, uh,
yes,
quite a few months after this, I was sitting there listening to a podcast, and somebody mentioned ionophores, and my buddy asked me, "Do you know what that is?" And I was like, "That's weird. I've never heard of that word before." And I've heard of most words, right? So it's really interesting when I haven't heard of a word, especially in respect to like the human body or something like that. So, I go look up ionophores, and it kind of kicked off this rabbit hole of very interesting research in the bioelectric field. And so
okay,
there's different bioelectric states that are just like a chemical state of like a dopamine release or something like that, or just like an adrenaline release. But these bioelectric states are modulated by how much charge state your cells have. So how much energy your cells are creating, how much of that energy can then be harvested and sent around the body. Well, ionophores are what are the charge carriers for between your cells and everything else. That's how the charges get transferred around the body. Turns
I
out
see.
ionophores are only really, or they're best generated by bacteria and fungus. So like our inner microbiome essentially. And so the fungus part of there really caught my attention. I was like, oh, really? And then so you start to factor in, like the massive restructuring of the brain when you're on these psychedelic substances. And then, the increased energy, especially when I went out and had this like running integration experience, my energy was through the roof. It was basically unlimited. I was singing while I was running at one point, which is stupid. How do you do that? How do you even breathe? I don't know. It
Yeah,
worked. Right?
I
So it was so this bioelectric mechanism is something that I think is very kind of, not really factored into the equation either. And that's I think that's part of the integration, because like what you're talking about, you have like they call it the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, which is like all part of the autonomic nervous system, which is basically which is exactly what happens, because all of a sudden I could focus on a single part of my body, and I could feel the actual, the muscle interaction with the tendon, and I could feel the tightening, the pulling on the bone. I could feel all of this, and I could, even have a visual representation of it in my mind. And so, and it was like, even like I rolled my ankle and I focused on my ankle. I'm like, fix that ankle. All of a sudden, for whatever reason, it didn't hurt anymore. That could be a lot of reasons, right?
Yeah.
But I was able to go out and repeat this the next 2 days in a row, so I didn't cause myself any long-term physical injury. So,
Yeah. One of the things that you talked about, you focused on the ankle and it got fixed.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, I truly think in that sense, yeah, might be just taking a hint, but taking a stab at this. But I think in that sense, cancer is very much psychosomatic, right?
Well, here's an interesting study I just read a couple days ago about that. So to indicate that it's very much not genetic. So they hooked up, or they monitored identical twins who were 100% genetically identical. They monitored them throughout their life, and it found that 10% of the diseases that they got were the same disease, meaning
I
that,
saw the same thing on LinkedIn.
yeah, meaning that
Yeah.
these things with cancer especially was very much not a genetically related thing. It was much more environmental. So environmental, just like the placebo effect, works on people. There's another funny one. You can actually find videos of this. It's been repeated many times in colleges, but they invite a whole bunch of kids and to a party with free booze, right? And they make fake booze, but all of a sudden everybody starts acting shit-faced relative to how
Yeah.
much they've drank, because it's a psychosomatic effect. So,
Yes.
to your point, I think, that environment aspect is something that moving forward, I think is going to be very important when we're figuring out where, why, how, and when.
I think you put it in a much better way than I would have tried to say the same thing. But yes, yes, the same research led me to finding more about this, of how much we think many things are predetermined versus how much
Mm.
is the possibility of we being tabula rasa and everything is happening with. So all these prerequisite, they are there, and then their interaction with the environment brings forth the symptoms and so on, right? And so the interaction with the environment, it happens, I feel like, automatically, unless there is a self-awareness that is built to or just self-awareness there to respond to that interaction in a very yeah, just respond instead of react.
Well, I think this whole machine is built to just respond to that environmental action, right?
Yes.
So, but yeah, I think, when you place consciousness on something, I think there's a little bit, you're essentially hijacking that system. That's kind of what
Yes.
this is. You're hijacking that system and telling it, no, we're not going to follow that rule. We're going to follow this rule.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just like meditation, which I'm sure you're familiar with. When you can have that full awareness of your body, you can feel your heartbeat, and then you can feel it, and you can travel with it up and throughout your body. And yeah, I was even able, to extend out of my third eye and look at myself and all of these things, and uh, that's fascinating too. And I think those types of tools, which have been recorded and been taught for years and years and years, but have lost their spirit, are
Yes.
still very much applicable, right? And I think we're in that kind of reawakening. That's kind of why we're all talking these days.
I definitely think so. I used to be so against, let's say, the, let's say, placebo effect. Not placebo per se, but healing by energy or by belief,
I used to be
or
too. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
right. And psychedelics changed it, meditation changed it, to the part that I understand the view that it seems almost impossible to convince yourself to heal something, right, just by thinking about it.
Hmm.
Yet somehow it's possible when there is work done on that area of developing the awareness.
Right. And so I think, when because I was against it too, and it's like all this woo woo stuff, right? And that's kind of what it seems like until you start to be able to understand what sort of mechanisms are at play.
Yes.
And, those mechanisms are really fascinating, and we're just really kind of scraping the surface of those mechanisms from a scientific point of view. Like the dopaminergic system, that reward system in the brain, the adrenaline system in the body, how that affects everything, what sort of states this puts us all into. Uh, and I think as we continue to explore down that path, we're going to find that we're able to, uh, it's not going to be just like because I thought it had happened. It's actually, it kicked off an internal mechanism where, you stepped a certain way to rebalance your body in a certain way that allowed the realignment of something that was causing this pain. Because a lot of pain in the human body is due to just misalignment of things, in
Oh,
my
definitely.
experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pain should have been just to raise the awareness to see that something needs to be checked. But as you said, I think the same thing is I read somewhere as maladapted pain, right? That just not serving any point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, more chronic pains are such, because there is
Right.
no need to be chronic. There is no need for chronic pain per se, with respect to how the entire world is in a state of transient nature, right?
Right.
So yeah.
Right, but I mean, I think when we have these, especially I've seen this many times, like when we go ahead and interfere with this process because we don't really understand what we're doing, but we think we have a good idea, which is pretty much everything that we do. Like for instance, when somebody goes and gets the discs in their back fused. Have you ever known people who've had to do this? They don't do it so much
Mm,
anymore, because
okay.
it caused a lot of people problems. And so
Yeah.
instead of like trying to fix these people via their nutrition, their habits, their exercise, their motion, their ability, their range of motion, these things like that, and body alignment, they just said, we're going to fuse your back and you'll be able to walk again. Except now you have metal rubbing on metal, and all sorts of problems arise from that, especially fast forward 10, 15, 20 years.
Yes. And I think that is done with a very primitive nature of understanding what's actually happening, and with that limited info. And basically, the drive is that fear of death. I
Sure.
see it as the one equation that's driving life. Life has to sustain an evolution. If it's gonna uh, cost mass extinction, what's going to survive as the more potency for surviving, which stems to one way of seeing it as fear of death, right? And you can see a lot of research seeing on either saving the human civilization, or improving the life of this particular person, or
Oh yeah.
just a human lifespan. And we have these goals and we're trying to go right. So I think that process doesn't seem to work, because we are, the moment you set a goal, you become narrow minded, right? But the same thing you explore from a different side, where uh, you're approaching this through meditation, or just consciousness play, where it's not that easy. You're not gonna cut your back and put something, and you don't think of something and the pain stops like that. It doesn't work like that. The awareness builds slowly, right? It's a practice, it's a lot of work to even just building attention, right? We might think we have a lot of attention, but we really don't, right? The moment we focus on that, we realize, this is how shitty my attention is, right? But just because, the funny thing is that when you're lost, you just don't know you're lost. So when you're
Right.
back, you think there is a continuous stream of consciousness or attention or focus that's happening, but that's not the case. And when you start actually doing the work, you see that if only I get lost in thought, my attention is gone somewhere, I'm going to look into the goal, and I'm going to try to fix this. But if my goal is just to try to be here and focus on this inner sense of world, And there, I think the changes can be very much effective, very powerful, and it'll be you can still get to the goal without the other way around.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can. There's multiple paths up every mountain.
Yes. That's one more funny part, right? Like self-fulfilling bias. I think we had that 2 weeks back. I wanted to share that because I think it's just I have had that for 22 years,
Hmm.
right? And after even 24, and after my first cycle experiences, knowing that my perception is not the only perception, I didn't easily fix it. Till date I have struggled with that with respect to the judgments easily being formed. I can judge easily, it's the most easiest thing I can do, right? And yet it took 3 years, I would say, to slowly seep it into myself that there lies a perception, and it's usually focus. I don't set out a goal to welcome other perceptions, right? I don't go out of my way to say that your perception exists. I don't see it that way. I see my emotions, right?
Hmm.
Most times when I think my perception is right and someone's view comes, I get an emotion called anger or
Hmm.
frustration or dismissive attitude, derogatory comments. So when I focus that, the only way to combat this is to understand there lies a broadened view, right? And it comes back to the same point. Instead of focusing, this is how we should have, like, we should convince people not to have different perceptions. We can't do that. That's what I think when I mentioned paradoxical nature, right?
Hmm.
You can never say someone to do good. You can never make someone not go after a particular physical object for pleasure or something. The more they are becoming limited, the moment that whatever tied them goes off, they're gonna sprung 100 200, and
Sure.
that happened in my life, right? And I see there is no way to avoid these things. It's just, as you say,
Hmm.
as time unfolds, things just go this way. There is no right way, I feel like, to um, reset it. We learn from a mistake to do things a little differently. That springs forth a new set of traumas. Because
Sure.
I used to have a lot of anger towards my parents with respect to why are you doing this, and at a point I got to the understanding that yes, I mean, if I were there, I wouldn't have done a single thing differently, right? But why did they do that? And you go back, and there is literally no single person. It's just I see God as such, the entire universe, right? When I cannot find anyone to blame, it's just the entire way that's happening, the domino effect, the cause and effect, and whatever you want to call, it's just happening that way. And okay, now it's messy, but I know at least I have the responsibility to fix it. I have a choice as well, right? And that alone is liberating.
It is liberating.
Yes.
The freedom of choice is very liberating.
Yes.
Which actually, interestingly, brings me back to my book. So,
Yes.
uh, you know, when you talked about that, there's no other way for that to happen. I think I would push back a little bit. I think there is a way. I think the reason we perceive that there isn't a way is because that's just kind of how we were raised. That's what we were taught. That's what we were exposed to, right? You only had a certain lens to view the world through. And it was the same thing for me for a long time. But I think if we were to teach a different philosophy, which is this no absolutes philosophy, which, because that's what you're describing. You're describing, you've described it almost essentially a couple lines from the book, which is kind of funny. Uh, but when you have that sort of philosophy and that's your ability to look at life through that lens, all of a sudden, all of these things that do cause you the dilemma of pain or, hatred or anger or, blame or what have you, now all of a sudden you can sort through those in a different way. Instead of looking at them as, as a cascading series of events, you kind of extract yourself from all of that. You can see that, and you kind of alluded to it a little bit in that, you could look at your mother and father, but then you could continue going further back. But at the same time, if you're able to look at that whole thing with the philosophy that, oh, there isn't really these hard lines in the sand, there isn't these absolutes about blame and where it comes from. Now all of a sudden, if that was the philosophy that was taught to people, and you're looking at the world through that lens, I think there is a potentially different path, or at least, maybe a shortcut along the path is probably a better description.
I agree with you with that point. um, I come to that part where this is what I want to contribute, and then there comes this another realization along with it, that all the things I have read started with the same intent. You and I, let's say we work on this project of establishing no absolute philosophy, right? It's just, again, it's just based on past, whatever limited perception that I've got of the past. It's just that there is infinite possibilities. It goes into infinite possibilities, and there is a possibility in which, again, the practice, the intent will get lost. And now you
Sure.
will have a set of 100 or 200 years down the line, you will have a no absolute school where teachers are enforcing kids to have no absolutes, and it could be chaotic, right? And it's funny, like, at a particular point, I think we will take forms again and again, and all we will do is that the ship will be going a particular way, and like, nope, not that way, I'm going to be rebellious this way. Because
Well,
I think the pendulum keeps swinging, and let's just try getting to the center
so,
without actually staying there.
so that brings up an interesting question about the nature of things, right? Because
Yes.
you know, years ago I wouldn't have subscribed to, yeah, we're coming back and we're trying different paths and all of this stuff. But now, there's some interesting evidence that suggests otherwise, right? We'll just say that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
you know, and so, but I've been thinking a lot about this recently because in order for life to exist from a scientific perspective, there's a break in the symmetry of the universe, right? So the whole idea that there's matter is because there's a slight asymmetry in the antimatter and matter creation rates. And so there's just a little bit more matter than there is antimatter, thus our universe. So we're kind of born from asymmetry. And I look at this through like a programmer's perspective. If I'm trying to, if I have this big asymmetry in my system that I'm trying to figure out, I need to iterate through multiple iterations of my system. And so I would write a program to solve that problem. And so, and what I'm kind of getting to is I wonder if we're the program to solve that problem. Or another way to put it is, Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, and all the king's horses and all the king's men came to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Now, if you look at how our technology has been evolving, it's a very, it's an exponential kind of curve. And so, what if all these iterations are us building the technology to achieve our goal?
100%. I was just gonna say that maybe not us with respect to humans, but the sentient beings that we are going to
The whole
develop,
thing,
whatever we
right?
call as AI, right? And it's like when you say domino effect, when the last domino falls, you don't ask which domino is important for this, right? Like you had to have all the dominoes in places for that to happen, right? And
Exactly.
and then there is a question: who pushed the first domino? Yeah, let's leave that alone. It's for God to decide, right? The same way the quark is making the initial push to either take a waveform or a particle form, and what resistance it's fighting against, right? And for me, that part, I would never know. For me, that is God. That's all. God is simple that way. It's like just repetition of the same thing throughout the universe. And I'll maybe tie what I read about meditation and quantum physics to this once we discuss about this AI thing, right? And I definitely think once the technology has been growing quite exponentially, and it's so rapid sometimes that our evolutionarily our emotions are are at a different pace, analysis of emotions, and now you have this interconnection, right? We are living in an age of information, right? So you just do not have just one particular, you live in a city, this is what all the people in the city do. Life is simpler that way, yet now with the because of the connections, you have thousand different informations, thousand different ways of living, and it's all so confusing when you do not know which one to choose, and when we feel truly powerless, right? Like, because as a kid, we are powerless. We are dependent on another being to just survive and sustain. And on some way, when there is not the right environment for the confidence to build, for the kid to have the platform to question things by himself, uh, I think the kid just becomes obedient, and it just does things, and it's just confused, right?
Right.
But now, leave that negative part alone, and when we see as technology rising to now, we are questioning if AI can have consciousness or not. And I truly believe it's just gonna be there, right? My last trip, I wasn't able to join the last round table because I had 5 grams of penis envy, and it was nice. I
You
was
should have
able.
joined.
Oh, I wasn't. I was completely not here.
Mm,
Usually, I'm jumping, singing on AC or DMT and shrooms, and I'm here and there. And I understand you. I'm usually a very non-active person,
mm.
right? Physically, and on shrooms, I'm just dancing with all these neck pain the next day. But at that
Ah,
time,
interesting.
I just feel like 3 hours of whoa. I didn't know I had that energy, because if I had to run 100 meters, I would sit and breathe for the next 10 minutes to just recoup myself. So how did that happen? So
Mm.
that is that. But this 5 grams of penis envy was me lying in the couch awaiting the trip, and for 5 hours I was just, the body was just there, right? And yeah,
Hmm.
there was a very interesting perspective, and I'm sure there are thousands of stories about the simulation theory, uh, like on Reddit, right? So it's just that very intuitively you feel, and when you put it to words, it's so limiting, right? But it made me realize, like, there is no question of if robots will be consciousness. It's just a question of when. It's just a question of when.
Well, there's evidence, and I get into this in my theory of information. So back in, I think it was 2012, Google had one of their big data centers, where huge supercomputers where it's all shared cloud kind of system. And so when you have that set up, there's algorithms that kind of dictate how the information runs through that system. And what had happened is they found that that algorithm was changed. The data was running through it in a different algorithm in a different state, and nobody changed it. It was just kind of an emergent property. And so I kind of had this hypothesis that consciousness is correlated to the density of information in a given area. And that, and so the size of that consciousness or how that consciousness communicates would then be kind of relative to that ratio.
Mm, repeat that part. The just the last part.
The last part. So you know, so you have the information over a given area, and then it would be, in the different areas would basically have essentially a different kind of frequency of consciousness, allowing different levels of communication. And so, a certain area of consciousness is then going to, like us, our brains have, all of our information in a relatively similar fashion in shape and orientation. And I think that plays into it as well. But that allows us to kind of communicate. But yet, at the same time, something like the Earth would be, have a consciousness. It would just be at a different frequency than what we're typically able to kind of perceive with this human transceiver.
That's beautiful, and I think see, again, all our discussions, right? Once psychedelics are done, I feel like we talk with the assumption the other person might be kind of on a similar track of the same meanings being derived from the same words we use.
Right.
On the outside, it seems like, oh, the words are simple, but no, not close to. I have no idea what you think of consciousness is. I don't know what you think of paradoxes. Neither you do me. Like, and the moment we start labeling that down and start discussing what do you think about paradox, and I think this discussion is just about that. Like,
Right.
what do I think about this particular word? And that's the fun part, right? And instead of doing that, we're just going around, beating around the bush, getting to that. And in that sense, when you say consciousness is that density of information through a small area, right? Yes, I see consciousness as just whatever the common denominator throughout the entire universe, and this part of what you call consciousness as self-awareness,
Mhm.
being able to make the choice, right?
Having
Even
a bit of
though
free
it might be
choice.
programmed,
Mhm.
yeah,
Well,
it'll be fully pre-programmed, yet at that particular point of interaction of different things, there comes maybe I, whatever this is, do not have to do what has been programmed to me, right?
so I kind of have a little bit of a different view. Through my theory of information, the way I kind of see it is that, you know, there's an infinite sea of potentiality. That's everything that could possibly happen. And
Yes.
as we make our choices, it's kind of like a wave moving out in the lake that hits the shore, then gets reflected back. Our choices are all send wakes out, and everybody else's choices, and everything that's in motion essentially is sending wakes out, and that's reflected back to us. And those reflections kind of shape the probabilities of what's going to happen next in our perceived reality. So the infinite sea of potentiality is everything is possible. And you know, so
Yeah.
therefore, if you look at it from a perspective of everything is then written because it's possible. But once
Yes.
you get to the the phase of reality that our free choice is determining the next most probable event that we're going to see. And that free choice is combined with everybody else's free choice around us and everything in motion, essentially. And that's the
Yes.
unfolding of reality. That kind of gives the arrow of time to reality.
Yes. See, it's so beautiful, As you were saying, I was thinking like we were talking about how we found this new set of people, right? Because I would think the same discussions that I used to have with my previous set of friends would be like really boring, right? Because
Right.
it's, it's actually at the center is a void, right? Going towards the void of explaining nothing, and it's just for the fun of it, right? At least I see it that way, without heading towards a point, trying to see each moment as it's. Stop the comparison if possible, but if at all comparing, make it a peak of your life. Each experience is right. In that sense, yes, it's quite nice how you put it.
Well, thanks. No, it was just one of those things where I had, you know, I had been observing, you know, the trips, the everything, the science, and that's where it kind of came together. And then there's other things in there that kind of make sense too when you think of like a deja vu, right? So
Yeah,
that would be two so similar events that are so really close on that probability that you
yeah,
actually pick up both of them as it's unfolding into reality a little bit. You kind of have that little like woozy feeling of whoa, I kind of walked between the
yeah,
planes right here a little bit.
yeah. And this has a lot to do with the statement that you're creating reality every single moment. How much smaller moment you can focus on, reality is created there, and therefore there is no objective world except for interaction of different things, right?
Right, and you know it's that variety of interactions. It's all those variables that kind of make the unfolding of reality. And so that's where you actually, you know, that's where you're, you know, something like a prayer, you know, because we've all had experiences and seen and have heard stories about where prayer, you know, from any denomination seems to have some sort of effect sometimes, right? Um, I mean, I've seen it. I've seen, and we could call it placebo effect. We could call it all this stuff too. But then there's other things too. Like so, we'll leave the prayer for a second. We'll go to Princeton had this thing called the Global Consciousness Project. Are you familiar with it?
I might have read it, but I'm not. So if you can explain a bit about
Sure.
it. Yeah.
Essentially, what they did is they just set up random number generators across the world, and then they were just monitoring them. And you know,
Okay.
so they're just spitting out random numbers, no rhyme or reason. But then they found that every time there was a major world event, up to like 12 hours prior to the event and 12 hours after the event, for like something like the tsunami in Sumatra back in the day, uh, these random number generators all of a sudden started spitting out sequences that were similar to one another across the world and got more similar as the event actually became to occur. And
Yes.
so this is kind of, you know, showing that there is some sort of interaction with our thoughts in the world around us. because it
Yes.
was changing these machines that wouldn't be affected by, say, like the electromagnetic, P wave from the, from a tsunami, or anything like, or any of the more physical things that you could associate with why these would all of a sudden turn into random number generators that were spitting out similar sequences. So that interaction, now you have something like a prayer. So that interaction is happening because it's a lot of people focusing their attention. This is also where I think, even though it was a stolen hermetic principle, the law of attraction was secret. I think that's where this was all born from. It's a similar concept. That didn't sound so fun.
I think I'm gonna go back to your global consciousness project.
Hmm.
Um, one part which I agree with is the part where I do think, yes, it's all energy play, right? And for the last 2 3 days, I think I've been focusing on what we could do in cyclic therapy differently, because it's not conventional therapy where it's not an intellectual game. It's going to be a much more deeper energy play, and our subtlest of intentions, if it's going to be corrupted by greed or something, just to put a standard. And if it's there and it's going to affect the old things, the actual healing is not going to happen. So what can we do differently, right? And coming back to this thing, yes, that energy is there. That energy is going to interact and affect with everything. However, what I do not see is that what we call as major event, it again depends on who is the observer, right?
Right, but you have to remember this is a major event because it was broadcast all around the world. So now it was going to be seen by many people in different places. And so now the random number generator in, say, Ohio is spitting out a similar sequence to the one in China, to the one in Egypt, to the one in Africa, to the one in South America, because of
Oh,
the broadcast, because the observer effect is now magnified via our media, and is now,
yes.
that whole observer effect was the entirety of the population who was witnessing that event as it was broadcast. And it
I
seemed to
see
have a
that makes more sense. Yeah.
and it seemed
Okay.
to have a precursor event too, where even before the event happened, these sequences started being spit out, which is a
Yes.
fascinating thing too. And so
Yes.
that's kind of, rabbit holes and rabbit holes and rabbit holes. But this is
Yeah.
kind of some of the more foundational, evidence and data that I use for my theory of information.
That's beautiful. I think I had a different understanding of what were we quoting as major event. Um, Coming to the precursor side, would it be similar to how they say physically when there is a tsunami, the water first recedes before it comes out? Would it be similar
So,
to that in energy waves, where
right,
these random number generators are perceiving it, right?
right,
Those information, and yeah,
yep,
right.
as above, so below.
Yeah. See, that's one of those statements that has always I would hold close.
Mm,
That reminds me of in any way, like duality aspects, or trying to approach non-dual state, or imbibing doing the shadow work and understand accepting the darker parts of yourself and so on, right? You cannot reach the gates of heaven. The tree doesn't touch the heaven without the roots touching the hell, right? And
mhm.
it's quite nice. It's kind of true, if you have
Sure.
with that perception and start seeing, yeah, it is
Yeah,
happening that way.
right. I like to use the word balance.
Yes, definitely.
Because that's and it's kind of in my book is, I have this little diagram that's the cube, and at the center of the cube is balance.
Yes,
And I think the more that we're able to balance out those things, which is acknowledging that, those are a part of us, I think that's where we find a lot of peace in life. And that's where eventually you can find joy and happiness and, all the other good, feely good stuff.
definitely. But as we were saying, right, you were asking about who am I. So one of those things is the part where it comes back to that. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine.
I, yeah. So sometimes the dogs get anxious when they're far, and I was getting distracted, so I might as well come and stand and continue this. Um, Sorry, what was your last point? I had something to add to that other. continue
Oh boy.
that thread.
Oh, now you're getting me. I see. I can listen to you. I don't listen to myself.
That's okay. That's good. This I think you were mentioning about the state of joy,
Oh
right?
yeah. Okay.
One of the works that app focus that shifted in my life was towards that. For me, the priority was a state of calmness within, right? In that way, I say things very erratically or without any sense, in the sense that if you're not interested in something, if it's disrupting your peace, just drop it. Doesn't matter how important it
Right.
seems, how many lives it's going to change. But because for me, if you're not present, that's just me, because my priority is this. If the priority was something else, right, if the priority was to help, then you compromise some of these
Right.
calmness to go and help. And if the
Right.
priority was money, which seems to be kind of
Everybody's
the major
priority.
part of what, yeah. So when we
Unfortunately.
do that, we get blinded to things that are actually happening, right?
Absolutely.
And
Well said.
so yeah, me, if I had to define, is just the person who's trying to put a state of calmness as the priority. So I do not do anything out of my way if it's going to disrupt my internal state of well-being. And the funny thing is that even with this intention of achieving the calm state, I lose myself thousands of times,
Well, sure.
number of times. Just coming back to that state is only seems to be the journey for the rest of my life for me. You know.
I think it's cyclical, or probably
Yes.
more probably more appropriately helical. And I think it's
Yeah.
more maybe even a helical vortex, because it seems
Yeah.
that as we go around and around and around, it takes less time to go through these cycles, but we can
Yeah.
recognize that it's the same cycle. Like, oh, here
Yes.
I am again. Oh, great. Okay, I
Yes.
I, I know what's happening this time, but even then,
See, you said.
yeah.
Sorry.
No, go
Continue.
ahead. No, go ahead.
Nothing. What I think this is the same thing my friend and I talk. What you said as helical, we just didn't have the right word. We would say spiral. So we're just gonna
Right.
go and come to the same thing again. The perception is gonna be different. The situation somehow, even though seems so similar,
Is
it is kind of the same thing. It is the same thing. I just have a different perception where I'm going to respond differently, and that
right.
kind of moves us forward in the helical. Either we can be spiraling around
Exactly.
the same thing, which
And
would be obsessive, or
right.
make a small progress.
And I think that's kind of, that's kind of a metaphor for doing the work, right? Is
Yes.
because you can sit there and say, I'm doing the work, I'm doing the work, I'm doing the work, but you'll end up on the same cycle over and over again if you don't actually figure out how to make the change. What's
Yeah.
causing you to get back in that similar position every single time. And sometimes
Yes.
it's really interesting, and I'm sure you've had this experience, is when you come around and you're like, oh damn it, I'm coming around again, and you're like, but I'm pretty sure I fixed that. And then you're like, oh, but these series of events, now I see. Oh, okay, that's my mistake. And then you go around again, you're like, again? Oh man, oh, there's my mistake. And it's not a simple process. It's not a slow process. It is a continual process.
Yes.
And it's something that uh, I think kind of psychotherapy touches on a little bit, but I think it's something that very much psychedelic therapy is,
Gonna
perfectly
be focused.
situated to help people with, because it allows you to
Definitely.
see this. It allows you to see that spiral, that cycle, that helix for what it is, right? And it
Yeah.
allows you to
Yeah.
examine yourself from the distant perspective, watching yourself go around it and be like, that's kind of silly. Why would you do that?
Yes. The helical thing you said, right? Again, it depends on a particular person in a particular journey. It's based on where the helix is making its rotation. Suppose the attention span is focused on quote unquote major events, or like, let's say, as forming of relationships, or a career move, or
Mm-hmm.
things like that. Let's say, you're not going to do it every single second, right?
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Right.
in a different sense, you're making a choice to get into a relationship and stuff. And if you see those patterns, they repeat. You kind of get into the relationship with a very similar girl. It's like, hmm, so much is similar. What's happening, right? But it takes a little bit of awareness to even realize that.
It
And
does.
for me, I think the helical cycles have started rap it's rapid,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the milestones have gone. Now
Right.
it's about My milestone is when I'm lost, I should come back, right? Whatever it is. And the cycle goes. And it's true. When I come around, it's like, wait, where did I go? Why do I keep going? Why do I keep going? I was just here doing
Hmm.
these things. Where did I go? And it's funny, right? And there is no
It is. There
anger
is
or
humor in it.
frustration.
Yeah, I would
There
call
is a
that
lot of humor.
I call it personally the divine comedy because
Divine comedy, I think
it's
I call
absurd.
it
Yeah,
cosmic humor.
yeah, cosmic humor. That's beautiful too because it is. It's just
Yes,
an absurdity. You're like, damn it, I know why I'm here again, but
yes,
this is silly. I guess we got to go through this. All right.
yeah. But one more thing, I think I was talking with George, I guess.
Mhm.
When you start into this inner work, right? There is no established way to do, and even if there is, it's not going to be the same for you. It's based
Yeah.
on a particular time or a particular situation. It doesn't have to comply with respect to how your life is going, and therefore a lot of this is, I would say, for me, everything was experimental in nature.
Mhm.
Like, I wouldn't know a particular situation. Am I being wise in responding, or is it just a defense mechanism coming up?
Mhm.
Am I avoiding it, or I just consciously do not want to participate? Because there is a lot of things in life right now I consciously choose not to participate. And but there was a phase in the beginning where I was very doubtful. Is
Mhm.
it an avoidant behavior that I'm developing, or
Sure.
am I making a choice, right? And for that, you gotta just do that, right? It doesn't matter. You wouldn't know if it's a defense mechanism or if it's a conscious choice unless it is done. And then there is an intuitive understanding of how things are changing. And you see, yeah, maybe it was a nice decision, or maybe not so much.
Yeah.
Maybe
Maybe
I won't act
should
the
have
same
taken
way.
a left.
What's that?
Should have taken a left instead of the right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just it's so funny. Like when you say left, right, these analogies seems like so meaningless when you're in
They are
a state
meaningless.
of higher awareness. It's like, what is left, what is right? Left and right are the same thing. It's like all absurdity, right?
Well,
At
right.
least
You know, and you start to get into things, and then you start to have really fun rabbit holes. You're like, well, what's up?
yeah. After a while, you just enjoy it. Just like you do not. Oh, because there was a phase really which, as much as I'm being a psychedelic advocate now, I would definitely ask people to, as long as they are not physically inclined towards schizophrenia. I do not know the medical aspects of it, but a person in my current state of being, or just causing internal mental suffering rather than any physical activity happening, I would say go for it. But there was a phase initially I was like, I regret taking this because this has made my life worse. Right? The night is the darkest before,
Before the dawn, indeed.
yeah, before the
Yeah.
dawn, and
Well, you
it,
have
it
to.
happens, and it's like,
Well, you
yeah,
have to look in the mirror too, and that's the thing is most people haven't looked at the mirror until you get to that stage of that first psychedelic or the first few psychedelic experiences where you actually really start to look at your life and be honest with yourself, because that's the
yes,
ticket there. It's the honesty part, because we're really good at compartmentalizing, judging, passing the blame. We're very good at these little games, but eventually in those psychedelic states you get to the point where there is no more games and you know it, and so you just have to kind of plow through it, and it can be very traumatizing for people for sure
yes.
at
But I also
first.
feel like at first, and I feel like that's just ripping the band-aid. It's a little
Right.
slower. It's just a little hurt. Whatever analogy you want to use, but it is going to be the better of whatever you call you. Right now, maybe it's idea of you, or maybe you get to a state of realizing your pure awareness. But whatever standard you set, there will be a progress. You will feel better. Whatever standard you want to set, there is a better thing that will happen. And yeah, but it's very scary, right? And
It
one more thing, when
is.
you mentioned about honesty, this popped in my head that I was always taught that honesty with the world, but doesn't matter. I could lie to you about 10 different things. It wouldn't affect my day as long as I'm honest with myself. And this
Hmm.
is something that was mind blowing, because it's not the lies we tell to others. It doesn't matter. You can tell, like, my parents don't know I eat chicken. I hope they don't see this video, but it's fine. That doesn't matter. I have said much worse about them. So it's not something. But that's the part, right? Like, that's not bothering me. It's with respect to, even, let's come back to the chicken thing, right? I maybe at some point I do not want to eat it. Right now I reduced it to just chicken from all meat, and I just want to enjoy it while I still am participating in it. And maybe there will come a time that, I don't want to do it,
Right.
right? Whatever I
And that's your
can, I
choice.
just don't want to.
Yeah.
Yes. But that,
Yeah, go ahead.
yes. Oh, nothing. That was my last part. That honesty toward within me is all that is required, and nothing else. I'm saying, like,
I would say I agree mostly, but there is a component that, we are, if we're out there lying with some sort of intent to gain, right? Whether that
yes,
be in a friendship or monetarily or whatever, I think that we
yes,
run the risk of putting
yes,
up, falsehoods, false idols, essentially inside of ourselves.
yes,
Because in putting in more things to correct the next time around the cycle.
yes.
I think that is very possible. Because words are important at the end of the day.
Yes, that's where I feel like I wanted to take that conversation, even though I can consciously set this idea that it doesn't matter what I lie to people, I just need to be honest with myself. But that being honest with myself is such a work that it overflows. And eventually it becomes honesty with people as well. Because
Sure.
that's what I feel is happening, at least in my life, right? By personal experience, that,
I would agree.
yeah,
Yeah, I would agree. I think the more honest you are with yourself, eventually it gets to the point where you just don't speak dishonesty.
yeah,
It just doesn't happen. In fact,
yeah,
and you'll even notice that times where you would have been dishonest because you thought that was the easy way out of the situation or whatever, you just say a 10-second truth about it, and the situation resolves itself better than any lie ever could have. And you're like, oh, well, that's nice. Oh, that's good. Yeah. So I agree. I think the more honest we are with ourselves, that does get reflected back into the world, via our
definitely.
choices, actions, and words, for sure.
And this takes us back to that part, right, where we say the world is a mirror for
Mhm.
us, and the world is just a like, we are projecting ourselves into it, as well as we are watching what we are projecting. It's just all these things, right, happening in this, from this point of view. This is what seems paradoxical. In that sense, paradoxical for me is just such a state of joy. If I'm able to identify the paradox or the irony in it, it's like nice. It's nice. The same with traumas, I think. What we talk about emotional processing, it's a simple acknowledgement of, oh, this is present in me. But to get to that state of acknowledging that, is
It's
it's a lot of work. At the end, it
right.
seems like the same with any kind of art or instruments, right? People, you see, they can play piano without looking, and guitar and all these things. Their initial struggle was hard. The
Hmm.
same way, I think, with respect to processing, after a point, processing trauma seems like, yep, I know you exist within me, chill. Right? It takes time to get there,
It
but once you
does.
get there, it's fun.
Well, yeah. I mean, well, I think I would call it fun so much as that you just don't recognize it as trauma anymore, because you realize that it's not traumatic, and all
Yes.
of a sudden you can get, instead of having a moment of believing that it's traumatic, you go,
Yeah,
yeah,
whatever. Right.
whatever.
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
we were talking a little bit about it before, and you kind of said a few more beautiful words about it. But one thing that I like to tell people just on the passing is, focus on the things that you can change, not on the things you can't.
Definitely. Right. I think these things, after a while, these were major quotes that I went by in the initial phase of doubt, right?
Hmm.
But now this seems second nature and common sense to me. So I skip a lot of these things in,
Oh,
if I
sure.
if I have to get certain point, as Jordan Peterson says, right? If you're trying to convey a concept for a person who's here, right, you gotta go, use some of the language there and slowly bring him to this point of view, and it's gonna take time. And I think that's what semesters are there for, months and months of where the actual education happens, of getting that view slowly, right? And the zone of proximal development which happens in kids, right?
Hmm.
And
Right.
but sometimes when I talk with people, I forget that. Not to say that, oh, I'm superior to you or something. I just have a different point of view.
Well,
But I also forget that in a state of ignorance. I have done the exact same things, and at that time the words that I am talking weren't useful. It was something else. Things like focus on what you can control and what you can't.
Mhm.
But right now, if we are talking and you say that, I'm like, yeah, I mean,
Of
that's the
course.
only thing we do, right? Like, there's
Right.
nothing you can't.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
I suffer from a little bit of the same thing. You forget how long the struggle was sometimes,
yes,
and you forget how hard that struggle can be sometimes. Because
yes,
after you've gotten past it, you've already climbed those mountains, and after you climb a mountain, it's not the same as climbing it the first time. You've already know where the top is. You can get there again and
yeah,
again and again. You know the path, right? And
yeah,
even though there's many paths up the mountain, now you know your path up the mountain.
yeah. And that's the part. It's that analogy was nice for me to see it this way, where the first time you went, like maybe you weren't motivated enough to go, and someone gave you that motivation, the push. That guy didn't leave you and just run off, right? You would have given up. And I forget sometimes that I'm just running here. Maybe once in a while, I can stop and need that motivation at that point, instead of, oh wait, it's such an easy mountain, why are you not climbing, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the judgment part, rather than, I mean, I understand the first time it seems scary,
It
right?
does
It
seem
seems you're going
scary.
to be tired, it seems your thighs are going to cramp up, but that's just temporary. Stay hydrated and you're going to be fine.
Oh yeah, stay hydrated.
Yeah.
That's a good piece of advice all the time.
Oh yeah. And I think I learned drinking water from LSD.
Oh well, I'll tell you. I remember. What I think it might have been LS. It could have been LSD. It was
Yeah,
what I'd never tasted water before. You're like, oh my goodness. I know what it was. I had been out on the beach and I had just been sweating in the sun for hours and hours and hours, and then I grabbed that cold water, and it was just like
yeah.
I've never tasted anything so delicious. This is wonderful.
They teach you in school that water is a odorless and a tasteless substance, right? And
Mm,
you kind of believe it.
you
So
do.
you grow up saying that, yeah, it's whatever, right? Like, yeah, sure, it makes 70% of me or whatever number that is, but yeah, it's water, right? Like, all these sense of what we try to say for a different point of understanding. For me, it happened that I just took things for granted, lost that magical touch. And when I rediscovered it, it was quite mind blowing. Like, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we do just we always take the things for granted, right? That's just kind of how it goes.
And the other part which I forgot
Sorry.
was, which, oh, that's okay. Which I think would be something I would say in everything. Suffering is a great thing, right? Because when we, let me just get through that part where I know, uh, because for me, I felt like there was a lot of this internal suffering that I was creating, and it was unbearable. And for me, that seemed the only reason I asked why.
Sure.
Because
Well, I
other
think
times yeah,
I think that's why most people end up asking.
yes,
I don't think you're inclined to question the world until you reach that state of suffering, right?
yes, yes. And in that sense, right, it seems like, yeah, it's nice, it's a everything, you see it in neutral point, you see it as a tool. It could be bad if you're not aware of it. Same with pain, right? I still haven't gotten major pain, so sometimes there is fear of, like, wait, I'm talking, but am I gonna react differently? So when I meditate and there is this maintaining of a single pose and the pain arises, okay, there is an understanding, I'm not a pain is a form of communication the body is doing with me, and the moment I respond to it in ways the body understands, it will let go of that consistent,
Hmm.
oh, the notification is here, do you want to check it? Just, I got it, you're not gonna die, so just chill, right? And it's just that.
Well, there is always that question of what if. Like if you get to that really bad pain point, and I've been there quite a few times just in life. I dislocated a disc in my back at one point, and wasn't sure if I was going to be able to walk again. It was kind of that's the
Yeah,
panic that sets into the mind.
yeah,
Obviously, I was just fine, and I was young at the time, so it really didn't matter. But that panic instantly sets in, and I haven't. and maybe there's something to be said about, being honest with yourself and not making stupid choices, and putting yourself in harm's way so that you're less likely to experience these things as
Yeah,
you venture down the path. uh,
yeah,
but you know I think there is something to be said about, what if I was in that great period of pain. And I've gotten close to that, as I've been down the path now, and I laughed.
yeah,
It was kind of one of those things, because it was probably 10 years ago, where it was just like, if I die tomorrow, I die tomorrow. I'm okay with that. I've lived a lot of the life. I got to see a lot of the things. I got to answer a
yeah.
lot of the questions. The longer I'm here, the more questions I'm going to seek to answer, but I got a good amount right here. So I'm pretty okay. Now, I don't know if I still share that rampant enthusiasm as the young man who was traveling Central and South America at the time, but
Yeah.
you know,
I think I'm there. It might seem like physically I'm 27, but mentally I think I'm done with that part of life where there is no, uh, as I say, each with each cyclic trip, I revisit the idea of suicide with a very new, funnier light. And what I call after this 5 grams of penis envy is like, I'm just at my suicide peak, where I'm like, I am not going to make it. Since the whole universe is me, I'm waiting for the universe to make a move and,
yeah,
subjectively close my account.
exactly. It's
But
like,
I welcome.
well, now I want to see the game play out a little, right? It was like,
Yeah, it is.
I'm pretty sure here for a reason. Chose a moment in time very special. So I'd like to see it, right? I'd like to see it play out.
You see, that's the opposite perception of you I have. Like, there simply seems no point in view.
But see, this
Point.
is but this
Yes.
is where I get back to, all the king's horses and all the king's men trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together again.
Yes.
I think
And
so. That's
for
Oh, go ahead. Go
yes,
ahead.
yes.
No, go ahead.
For me, the point was okay. You have this purpose. Let's say the human civilization is heading towards this, or towards maybe this particular point where okay, maybe sentient beings, further universe exploration or consciousness raising to this level. Or let's go to your example, the Humpty Dumpty put back together, right? And my question is, what after, right? So after that, if a point comes, would this point become insignificant, or would it just be another domino in a list of dominoes, or is this where it ends? Like, so I feel like the point is derived from how much we can enclose a particular thing. If it's continuously open ended, and if it's just going, and I seem to think it's a infinite in that sense, and there simply cannot seem be a point. Like existence cannot have a point that way. But all these subjective perceptions we have, there can be purpose, there can be meaning. As long as we have this conceptual understanding of what it is, we can have those sort of things. But existence as such would just be like, yep, completely nihilistic.
Well, I mean, I think there's that perspective. Sure. Uh,
Yes.
I, I think, I think we can take the analogies further, though.
Yes.
So for instance, if we were, say, a program running to repair a broken cosmic, we won't even call it an entity. We'll just call it, whatever caused what science deems the Big Bang, and the asymmetry in our existence and the expansion of our universe. If we're just trying to solve that riddle, that the purpose of solving that riddle could have multiple different reasons. One, it could be purposeless, as you stated, but it could also be because it's more of even a training ground, or an evolutional path. This, and then, if we start to apply principles like as above, so below, I think we can get a little bit more intricate in, the potentialities of that program running.
Yes. See, I see till that, and we extend it, right? So what is after that? If you want
Right.
to translate this to past events, right? Let's say there were human people at the time of dinosaurs, and um, they were talking about this, and they said the point of this is going to be the asteroid is going to hit and this is going to end, right? There is a hypothesis that without dinosaur population ending, humans couldn't have, be where they are, right? And based on that hypothesis, if you see, the point was for the dinosaurs to die, right? The humans had to be. That's what the people at that time said, and we became, and now we have the same thing. So it's like
Well,
temporarily I
not
see the point.
necessarily, but because the
Yes.
dinosaurs had to die so the humans could live, so we could get the oil from the dinosaurs, so we could build the technology to take us on the next step of this path of this cycle.
Yes, I think that still comes to some kind of temporal limitation.
Right, but well,
I see
because of our ability to envision, but
yes,
but then also if you were just to say that that had no purpose whatsoever, then there
yes.
would be, you could also kind of posit that then there would be no reason to have an asymmetry that would give rise to our universe and life as we know it. But for whatever
Ah,
reason, there is that asymmetry that is allowing us to have a conversation right now. So,
yes. And
so
what
that
if out of the
so that would
infinite pos?
well,
Yeah.
but that would just kind of set the stage that there is some sort of reasoning behind this. There is some sort of purpose.
Mm,
Like
okay.
for like if you cut your arm, right? All of the
Yes.
all of the platelets go and they fix your arm. Their
Yes.
purpose doesn't cease to exist. They're still circulating in the system. They're waiting for the next event.
Yes. So that purpose is there, right? That's what I'm saying. And let's say platelets was just um, present in humans,
Mhm.
and humans were to extinct tomorrow. So the platelets will die along with them.
Right.
So they have a purpose, but they have a purpose for their lifetime.
Right.
I feel
Sure.
the again, let's say there is another humans population that rises, but this time we have termed platelets. Let's say, but the same cells what we quote as platelets now causes something else. They are sitting in lungs and absorbing oxygen. In that sense, yeah, their purpose would be that. But again, for what I see is that there has to be a time, there has to be a transition for things to have its purpose, and it will transient to something else, I
Well,
believe.
I agree with you. I'm just saying perhaps, our purpose isn't as grand as we are the center of the universe that we all seem to think.
I do not think so.
We could just be the platelets, right? We could be Humpty
100%.
Dumpty's men trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together again.
Yeah, this quote is, I think, similar to what you said. We are gods of all the atoms in our body, and we are atoms of the god that is the universe, right? And that's true. I feel like I do not see infinity as in just space or something like this planet is there, this galaxy is there, nearby another class universe, let's say in space and in time. I also see it in um, this is also spatial, but the same way the cells are fighting and having their own thing at a higher dimension we exist. We would be playing a some game and there would be a higher dimension where there is a being, right?
Right.
I cannot comprehend it for sure, but there is an intuition that infinity seems, at least one way of trying to understand infinity seems that way.
Sure. And I think if we were to look at consciousness like we were talking about before, the density of information over a given area and how
Yes.
that would just be a different form of consciousness. I think if
Yes,
you were to take the entirety of the universe, that would be a different form of consciousness. Now,
for sure.
but at the same time, now we're getting really deep into the woods here, right?
Yeah,
Let's just answer all the
love that.
questions we can.
Yeah,
So, that's where I come back to the asymmetry of everything and why there is this need for us to have this experience. Because I don't think it's purposeless.
another contribute. I see where that perception is coming from, right? So it's this thing that I saw in a trip to infinity where uh, they were talking about different ways of their own field understanding infinity, and one of those
Right.
examples was you have you're thinking of making a car wheel, right? And they started with the three sides, right? Three corners. And I mean, it acted as a wheel, but it was too bumpy. So these guys thought, I'm just going to add corners, and they made it 10, 100,000. And it became smoother, smoother, smoother. So what if we can make it infinity corner, which kind of becomes like zero corner, which is a circle. So in that sense, infinity and zero are the same thing. So all the purpose we can think of are all purpose, and the infinite purposes add up to equivalence of not having a purpose as well. That's how I see it.
Hmm. I'm with you until you said the end there, where it adds up to having not a purpose as well. Because I don't think, you can say you can add them all up to zero.
No, it's with
Well, or
respect
how
to
the
how
circle,
the
because
yes,
because if even if you that kind of gets into like a fractal, right? So
yes,
even if it looked at zero from a perspective, as you zoomed in, it wouldn't be zero. It would still just be more points on that. So the
yes.
zero is an illusion. The lack of purpose is therefore illusionary.
Yes, the same way, like as we are approaching infinity, so we approach zero as well, I feel like. And that completes the circle without a starting and an ending point. And
Well,
that's the best part. You can choose whatever, like if I ask you to draw a circle, you can have your own starting and ending point, and I cannot sue you for that. I just asked you a circle. So in that sense, I think purpose, I think there is a choice.
sure.
Yeah.
Well, if
You
there's
want to have purpose.
if there's a choice, then there's purpose.
That's the paradox. The choice to be purposeless.
All right, brother. All right, brother. I love it. Way to bring it all the way around. Well, I mean, this has been a wonderful conversation, man. I can't wait to do it again. I,
Definitely.
I have to run here.
Yeah.
But it was awesome talking to you. Is there anything you want to plug?
Oh, nothing. I'm just looking forward to the next time you're free. Let's continue.
Right on. Well, let's do it next week.
Okay.
All right, brother.
Bye.
All right. You have a great one.